The first one is to our international audience. I thank all of you for your unwavering interest toward the prospect of Ukrainian resistance against the Russian war in our country. Such an interest is an important precondition for the international financial and military support that is simply invaluable for us. Thank you very much for your Christian solidarity. Secondly, I'm sure you are well aware of the main outlines of Russia's current war against Ukraine. Therefore, in the time allotted to me, I would rather talk about those aspects that attract less media attention. For example, I'm truly surprised how the concepts familiar to humanity, like peace, negotiations, or reconciliation, acquire almost the opposite meaning in the curved mirrors of this war. One of the reasons for this is that the favorite method of Putin's regime is the construction of lies around deep stereotypes rooted in basic cultural instincts. In addition, I noticed that while speaking about the war, Ukrainian and non-Ukrainian churches typically speak almost exclusively about their charitable work. Well, it is absolutely legitimate from the Christian point of view. A church has to be on the side of those who suffer. At the same time, the prophetic voice of the church should be no less loud. Therefore, the Christian oikumene must try to clean up the distorted concepts of peace, negotiation, and reconciliation. So let us have a closer look at these concepts. Peace. During any war, people terrified of its tragedies instinctively become pacifists. Against the background of such spontaneous pacifism, Ukraine may look like a party of war. So to say, can't you give Russia a part of your territory and thereby stop this endless bloodshed? Well, with bitter irony, I want to remind you that our president, Volodymyr Zelensky, was such a pacifist at the beginning. It was he who began his presidency with the specific phrase, "To stop the war, you have to stop shooting." However, on February 24, the day of a massive Russian attack, he put on his famous green t-shirt and realized that Putin left him no choice. The Kremlin wants to destroy Ukraine as a state and Ukraineness as an identity. On June the 8th, while at an audience with Pope Francis, last year, I forgot to add, last year, I asked him, your words against weapons alarmed Ukrainians because it is weapons who give us the opportunity to defend ourselves. Do you think that the people have the right to defend themselves at the moment of aggression? The Pope replied vigorously, yes, of course it has. Not only that, but people who refuse to defend themselves become suicidal. It is important for the Church not to automatically believe the rhetoric of reckless peace, since very often the term peace hides interests that are far from building peace. For example, it has long been noted that Russia talks about peace when it is defeated on the battlefield and seeks to gain time to regroup and strengthen its troops. Therefore, Ukrainians, who are those perhaps most eager for a peace that would stop daily human tragedies, are so suspicious of some peace proposals. Neither the world's democracies nor the church can approve of a peace that would make aggression a successful method of appropriating foreign territories. The only just peace is a lasting peace. As Roberta Metsola, a president of the European Parliament, stated, without freedom and without justice, there can be no peace at all. Negotiations. The media periodically remind us that every war ends in negotiations. Therefore, they say both parties to the conflict need to quickly sit down at the negotiation table and make mutual compromises. My comment on this is simple. First, it is impossible to negotiate with someone who uses genocidal violence, lies, and blackmail to coerce their opponents. Secondly, is there even one agreement with Russia on Ukraine that Putin's regime has not violated? Where does the certainty come from that this time the Kremlin will keep its promises? And when finally will the West realize the fundamental difference between the two civilizations? In a democratic society, compromise is a sign of wisdom and strength, and vice versa. It is a sign of folly and weakness in the Russian anti-civilization. And this has been going on for centuries. I will quote you the words of Gilles Fletcher, ambassador of England to Moscovia at the end of the 16th century. I quote, "As for the fidelity to the word, the Russians, for the most part, consider it almost nothing if they can win something by deception and break the promise they made," end quote. So it is a big mistake to negotiate with Russia, ignoring the above-mentioned warnings that come not only from Ukraine, but from almost all Central European states which have tasted the Russian world. The old Europe must recognize that its recent approaches to Russia and Ukraine have proved untenable. In particular, because of Western pride of reason and sense of superiority, and therefore both the old and new Europes must build a new understanding of their common history, taking into account the experience of Central and Eastern Europe too. Therefore, the statement of Chancellor Olaf Scholz about Zeitenwende is very appealing for Ukrainians. It is only necessary to prevent it from being interpreted in the too narrow and minimalistic way. Reconciliation. I recall that during one Zoom meeting with Italian Catholics, one woman exclaimed, "You were brothers. What prevents you from reconciling and eventually ending this war?" A similar incident happened to a Ukrainian woman from Dnipro who, standing near her house destroyed by a Russian missile, exclaimed in despair, turning to the Russians, "We loved you so much. Why are you killing us now?" Behind these two stories is a misunderstanding of both the nature of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and the prerequisites for reconciliation. The Russian-Ukrainian conflict is a zero-sum identity conflict and therefore cannot be resolved in principle. It is impossible to combine, on the one hand, the desire of Ukrainians to preserve their freedom and statehood, and on the other hand, Russia's desire to revive its empire. Moreover, it would be a mistake to believe that the revival of the empire is a dream of Russian elites exclusively. Ukrainian journalist Vitaly Portnikov rightly noted, "I know it is generally accepted that Russian propaganda is changing Russian society, but I think it's Russian TV that speaks in the voice of the Russian people, not the other way around." End quote. The Russian idea has long considered one main thing as a value: the increase in space. This shows their sense of greatness. Ukraine's belonging to the Russian Empire is sine qua non, since the legitimization of the empire itself rests in historical Kiev. Therefore, in the doctrine of Russian imperialists, the Ukrainian nation is a fiction and an intrigue of either the Poles or now the vicious West. Therefore, only the right Russians must live on the territory of Ukraine. If someone resists it, he or she must be absorbed or extinguished. So do you see any opportunity to reconcile these mutually exclusive positions through negotiations? I don't. Now let's look at the prerequisites for reconciliation. For Putin, the Ukrainian nation should simply disappear. It means there is no place for reconciliation at all. Accordingly, as President Zelensky said recently, it is not worth offering Ukraine compromises with conscience, sovereignty, territory, and independence. From Ukraine's point of view, reconciliation is possible under the following preconditions. First, liberation of all occupied territories and return of Ukraine to internationally recognized borders in 1991. Second, charging Putin's regime as one that has resorted to mass crimes against humanity and became utterly non-negotiable. And here I don't mean simply removing Putin himself from power. His regime is also dangerous. Third, bringing to justice all those responsible for the above-mentioned crimes against humanity and guaranteeing material and moral restitutions for these crimes. As Jan Tombinsky, a former EU ambassador to Ukraine, stated, I quote, "The only and most important guarantee the free world must provide for Russia and its regime is the certainty of holding those responsible accountable for committed crimes." End quote. Fourth, debunking the ideology of the Russian world as imperial and chauvinistic in nature and conducting a mass deputinization of the Russian population. Fifth, public and sincere repentance of the Russian people. And the latter point is very important, is most important. I have no doubt that each of these points is fair, and the alternatives might be fatal. Let me cite a Washington Post editorial on February 18, the year 2023. To allow an outcome that rewards the Kremlin in any way would be a moral travesty. It would also deal a potentially lethal blow to the principle on which Western stability and civilized international order rests, that sovereign states cannot be invaded, subjugated, and subjected to mass slaughter with impunity. However, the question remains, is this Ukrainian scenario of reconciliation with the repentant Russia on the model of Germany in 1945 realistic? Because it is impossible to occupy a huge Russia, and no state or even a group of states can establish an occupation regime there. Arkady Ostrovsky, the editor of The Economist, stated, I quote, "Everyone understands that this war cannot have the finale that was in 1945. The war can truly end only inside Russia." End quote. Hence, many Western politicians conclude that Russia cannot be defeated, and its collapse will have unpredictable consequences. Behind this is the fear that nuclear weapons will fall into the hands of irresponsible terrorists. Well, similar was the fear of George W. Bush and Margaret Thatcher, who in 1991 came to Kiev in an attempt to save the Soviet Union from collapse. However, the path of history could not be stopped then. It will not be possible to do it now as well. History cannot be stopped at all by our human fears. Timothy Snyder, a Yale professor and Eastern European scholar, who was also critical about any concessions to Russia under the influence of nuclear blackmail, and added, I quote, "It would be a disaster for everyone if Russian nuclear blackmail succeeded. If any nuclear state can coerce others by references to its nuclear stockpile, then foreign policy of any kind becomes impossible. Non-nuclear states will always have to yield, and non-nuclear states will always have to yield, and nuclear states will run the world. And so support of Ukraine decreases the chances of nuclear war by showing that nuclear blackmail does not work, end quote. Therefore, the posture of Western diplomacy will be wrong if, guided by fear, they actually support the existence of the current Russian regime with their own hands. And in order not to look like a blinded radical in your eyes, I will refer to the words of the famous Russian thinker, unfortunately already deceased, Yuri Afanasyev. I quote, "It is necessary to say, is it necessary to save such a Russia with the despotism of the authorities, where the individual and most of the population have become the object of suppression? My answer is no. It is necessary to save, but not this Russia and not this regime. It is, as I understand it, about the need to relay the very foundations of our life order. It is necessary to change the paradigm of Russia," end quote. And I want to remind you that this is the opinion of the Russian thinker. How to change the paradigm of Russia? So the task is to change it, and I totally agree with that. Russia must renounce its errors and false ideologies, renounce its tendency to lies, hatred, and violence, and most importantly, go through repentance. That is, to really change the paradigm of its existence. Let me say honestly, Ukrainians do not believe in such an option now. However, we Christians know that it is God who is the master of history, and that human history is full of miracles. And we remember the Lord's promise: with men this is impossible, but if they will forsake all things for my sake, with God, whatsoever things I speak are possible. Matthew 19:26. But do we as the church have a roadmap for this? Appeasement of the aggressor is something contrary to the task because it only encourages him. Simple pacifism is contrary to the task as well. It would be our Christian obligation to clarify and promote those measures which would bring Russia closer to the conversion of its spirit. It's clear that I cannot replace the collective wisdom of the Church. That's why I appealed to the Holy Father to convoke an extraordinary synod of bishops to discuss the topic of war and just peace, repentance, and reconciliation. At the moment, however, I only know that we will not be able to promote Russia's conversions if we, A, support a regime that suppressed the positive spirit of Russia, and B, do not bring those responsible for crimes while being guided by false love for the Russian people. And C, until we realize that Russia can convert to Christ, while the Russian Empire can never. So let me conclude my talk citing my own words from my previous article. Christianity cannot be reduced to sentimental compassion because it must be just. Compassionate Europeans need to realize that by taking Russians out of responsibility, they are actually doing them a disservice, because the crime of the Russian state in Ukraine, not understood as a sin and not brought out of the soul through repentance, will inevitably lead to an even worse sin. To truly love the Russians is precisely to reveal to them the scale of their crime, to allow them to be horrified by what they have done, and to direct their souls to sincere repentance before God and mankind. Only after the collective Russian soul stumbles before the burden of its own responsibility and washes away tears of repentance before the victims, only then will it open the door to the future of Russia and the entire world. Thank you very much. And now I will prepare myself for discussion.
Okay, dear participants, we may put our questions in many ways via chat here or raising hand, both virtually and physically. Now I inviting you to the discussion, and who will be the first to put the question?
Maybe can I have a question, please?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I would like to ask about the connection to the Second World War, because I think the pacifist point of view in these days and the time of the past is a little bit similar, because I'm from Czech Republic, which was Czechoslovakia, and many pacifists thought that if they sacrifice the Czechoslovakia to Third Reich or the rising Nazi empire, that the crisis will just go on. And I think even in that time, the Catholics or the Holy Seats didn't give some strong stance on the situation. They just, if I can say it like that, they just watch from the sidewalks. So do you think that the church could have somehow changed their stances during these 70 years or something like that, that in this kind of crisis, which is today, that they can get a stronger stance on the situation, that they can maybe their stance or the opinion of Holy Seats can really influence the current view of Catholics or the other people in these days? Because the situations for me, it's a little bit similar to what it was 70 years ago. So if I can say it like very quickly, what are your thoughts about the shift of the stance of Catholic Church on this topic, on this crisis from the past time, and how it changed during this time and how it stands now? if you understand.
Well, it's a little bit, it was a little bit difficult to understand, but let me answer on what I seemingly understood. First of all, I want to say that I'm not a researcher of the pacifist movement, so I cannot compare some details of pacifism in different times, but I may compare attitude of Ukraine since the year 2014 and the year 2022. It's very, very close. In the year 2014, first of all, we were shocked and we warned the West. We appealed to the West that we warned you after the war in Georgia, that after that war in Georgia, the next would be Crimea. And the West didn't react on these warning. Why? Because let's keep peace. Let's not do anything that Russia will treat as an aggression. Okay, this is very pacifist position, but the next truly was Crimea. And then it was the moment for Ukraine, how to react. Some diplomats, some officials in Ukrainian government told me that there were telephone calls from some European diplomats at that time in the year 2014. Don't do anything, don't shoot. Please do not shoot. We will solve this issue diplomatically. Again, no war, no war. So it was a compromise from the West to preserve peace. Was it successful? No, because Russia considered that method, that position as a weakness. Okay, we will go further. And the reaction of the West will be the same. No reaction at all. So now we received the year 2022 and 23. So now the Ukrainian position is no appeasement of the aggressor anymore. Because otherwise, not only we will lose, but the world will lose. The international order will lose. That's why I spoke that pacifistic approach to this conflict is wrong, because it doesn't include the way of thinking of the Russian elite. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I was asking about this kind of topic. Yeah, I was interested because, as I said, the situation with Czechoslovakia from the time when like the Munich agreement was like, yes, the situation, yes, you just said was like the broad said, no, we want peace. And if we have to sacrifice one country or the borders of, yes, that country, yes, that's no problem, just give them to it. Yeah, I was just wondering if you're seeing the similarities between these situations. And yeah, I wanted, yeah, to say that for me, it's the same situation. We already have this kind of situation in history. And in these days, we are doing, or the Western world is doing the same thing, that they think that if there is one aggressor, the big country, very powerful, that if they will just give them everything they need or want, that the situation can be resolved peacefully. But we already saw that it cannot be like that. And yeah, I was wondering about your opinion on that thing. Thank you very much.
And you remember the famous Chamberlain's phrase, "We brought peace to you."
Yes, yes.
After Munich conference, we brought peace, no peace at all.
Yeah, yeah.
Encouragement of the aggressor.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, someone else? Oh. From Myroslav, there is question in the chat.
Yeah.
From Arseny Kustov. Can you read it?
Yes, thank you for the lecture. In fact, I want to use an opportunity to ask you more about the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in the Soviet period as a participant of the Ukrainian Helsinki group, only if I can. Yes, of course, you, if our boss allows.
Please.
So, Mr. Kusto, please.
I don't know about there's some, I don't know, oppression and so on, how it's harder, just more about it. I don't know about just in Soviet period about, yep.
Yeah. In 1946, the NKVD KGB of that time, together with Stalin's regime in general, organized the so-called Lviv Sobor, Lviv Pseudo Sobor, that claimed that the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church voluntarily dissolve each other, close its existence, and voluntarily join the Russian Orthodox Church. Of course, the voluntarily is very ironic phrase in this sense, because all the hierarchy of the church, except one of the bishop who was outside of the country, and many priests were arrested, and the church was officially banned. So there was no Greek Catholic Church officially. Of course, it existed, but in a clandestine, how to say that?
Underground state.
Underground church. And it was very devoted struggle for preserving some church activity underground. Priests were persecuted, or let's say they had to organize liturgies in secret places, and these gatherings of people were very spiritually motivated and very spiritually high, on a high level. And the church existed in such an underground form until 1989, when Gorbachev met Pope John Paul II in the Vatican, and they agreed that the Soviet Union will allow the Greek Catholic Church to exist officially. After that, all underground communities of Greek Catholic Church announced that they exist and applied for recognition, for judicial recognition. And that was the transformation of the situation totally. And after 1989, the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church not only restored its previous numbers and potential, but became even more strong now. So that's in short. As a Ukrainian Helsinki group, we produced a document where we mentioned not only Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, but also some other churches, Ukrainian Autocephalous Orthodox Church, and also some Baptist communities that were not that were not recognized in the Soviet Union. We mentioned that it was a violation of their religious human rights.
Thank you.